It is Friday, November 19th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone. As per usual, let us start with our PlayStation Plus reminder. The November titles are still available, so make sure you claim your 6 free games before they go away. And for our first story, let's talk about PS5's first year on the market, because one thing that we didn't touch on last week, Sony published this on the PlayStation blog shortly after our last video, but they gave us a bird's eye view of the top 10 most played games on PS5, and it's based on, well, native PS5 games, so not PS4 stuff or anything like that. They have to be native PS5 games. The data is up to September 30th, so not quite the full year, but practically the first year of PS5 as it's been available. And it's ranked on play time, so total hours with these games. It's not based on unique players or copies sold, nothing like that, so keep that in mind when looking at the top 10. But the top 10 most played PS5 games are Fortnite, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, FIFA 21, NBA 2K21, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Destiny 2, MLB The Show 21, Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, Demon's Souls, NBA 2K22, and out of the entire PS5 library, PS5 users have accumulated 4.6 billion hours of gameplay, which is a very large number. But the top 10 should not come as much of a surprise, really. I did see it make the rounds when it comes to people discussing the list. You got to keep in mind it is ranked on play hours, so I mean, of course, it's going to be largely dominated by yearly release sports titles, free-to-play, third-party games with broad appeal, live service stuff. I mean, that's just the reality of what most people are buying consoles for and playing these games on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. I mean, that's the reality of it, right? But it is still cool to see Demon's Souls and Spider-Man make the top 10. If anything, I'm more surprised about Spider-Man than I am about Demon's Souls. It's cool to see Souls on there, but I mean, I think we're past the point of, it's not surprising that these games do well, right? I mean, they've sold millions of copies, so Demon's Souls shouldn't be any surprise to be on here. It was a launch title. You can spend 40, 50, 60 hours with it per player, whereas Miles Morales, it may have sold more, but it's a very short game, so it takes 4 to 5 hours to finish the main story. If you go for the Platinum, we're looking at maybe 16 to 20 hours, depending on how fast you are with it. So I'm more surprised that Miles Morales made it on there versus Demon's Souls, but still pretty cool to see nonetheless. Now, in that same blog post, and this was written by SI President and CEO Jim Ryan, he does mention once again that there are more than 25 games in development at PlayStation Studios. He says, and I quote, "The imaginative game creators and publishing partners we work with have launched more than 360 games on PS5. Additionally, there are currently more than 25 games in development for PS5 at PlayStation Studios." Now, we did pretty much hear this already, word for word, at the start of the year from that Wired.com article where it was the same thing. More than 25 games in development at PS Studios, and nearly half of them being a new IP, which was what we heard about back then. That's encouraging, especially because we don't know how high above 25 they're talking about here. Probably under 30, but that means new IPs around 12 to 13, maybe 14 titles, which would be pretty cool. The thing is, we have to keep in mind that PS Studios does include second-party games nowadays, so externally produced projects, Death Stranding, Destruction All-Star, Sackboy Big Adventure, they carry the PS Studios logo because prior to that, where it was Worldwide Studios, that was strictly first-party content. So we have to keep that in mind when we're talking about PlayStation Studio games and this supposed 25-plus number. I'm assuming, if they're staying consistent with their messaging, that they're including those projects as well. So games like, or the games that we're expecting out of Deviation, Firewalk, Haven, we've brought them up so many times before, but in theory, those should be PS Studio games. Next up, one of the higher profile independent games that Sony has been showcasing for a bit on PS4 and PS5 is SIFU, and this game actually got its release date moved forward. So before, if you remember, it was delayed to next year, February 22nd, and well, we see now that that first quarter is really packed, and especially the 22nd. Well, it moved up to February 8th, so that's actually great. A little bit of breathing room there, and we also got 2 new trailers for the combat and aging system, which the combat we actually saw a decent amount, even so much as a move list, moving around the environment, seeing how a full room of enemies plays out and how you can kind of crowd manage and you don't want to get too overwhelmed. And then for the aging system, we also saw that as you die, you have an opportunity to learn more moves, and The game looks really good so far, and I'm pleased because the 22nd in particular was very busy. I mean, that whole week is busy, the whole month is packed, so it's going to be tough for some of these smaller games to release and have their own spotlight for what might be just a few days once the reviews come out. So if SIFU is received okay, then it does have some room to actually have its own time on the market, which I'm happy to see. Moving on to our next news story, do you remember the game called Project Awakening, where it was announced years ago, actually, 2015, 16, somewhere around there, up until it had more of a proper formal reveal on PS4 like 3 years ago, and that's where it looked really good, like questionably good. Left a lot of people wondering, like, okay, you have our attention. When's it coming out? Is it really just PS4? Because that was the only platform announced at the time, and it's been radio silence pretty much since then. And the recent update here is that the developer Psy Games held a technical conference on the engine that they're building for this game called the Solista game engine. So this new footage that we actually got shows the procedural generation and features of this engine, and so it's not quite a proper trailer, but this should be the most up-to-date footage of the game that we have so far. We can see the foliage populate the environment, and I guess that's cool. I mean, it's really important to note that the information that we did learn back in this summer, it was like June or May, and I don't remember if we actually covered this as a story in LTPS. I don't think we did, but the games director did confirm that the engine and the game are being made at the same time. And that's like a big piece of info, or a huge caveat, right? Because we've seen time and time again that when the game and engine are being made in tandem, that's where it's not bad news, but it's not really encouraging news. We've seen that a lot of developers have struggled going about it that way. It's not all doom and gloom. The game still can come out, but it seems pretty clear that the game is going to have some sort of proper re-reveal years from now on probably PS5, and I think that's also something the director mentioned as well, where in all likelihood the game will get moved out of PS4 if it takes too long, which, let's face it, it's 2021, the game's nowhere near being done, they're making the engine and the game at the same time, so it's going to be a while until we see this game get a proper re-reveal on what I'm guessing is PlayStation 5 and maybe other platforms as well, if that is on the docket. For our next story, we now have the full lineup of nominees for Jeff Keighley's The Game Awards, which will be airing December 9th. That's a Thursday, so we can follow up on Friday to talk about all the awards that were handed out. And for this event, we can go over some of the nominees that PS Studios picked up. For Game of the Year, the nominees are Deathloop, It Takes Two, Metroid Dread, Psychonauts 2, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and Resident Evil Village. Now, this is kind of what I was getting at in what episode was it? 1 or 2 weeks ago, where Returnal won Game of the Year for the Develop Brighton Develop Stars Award, and that seemed really cool and I was excited, but at the same time, like, I don't really expect Returnal to win many Game of the Year awards across a lot of publications, so yeah, I love the game, but I wouldn't really say it was like snubbed here, right? It could have been in there, could have not been in there. It's gonna be fine, right? Because it's nominated in separate categories as well, like Best Game Direction, Best Audio Design, Best Action Game. I think it's totally deserving of any of those. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart was also nominated for Best Game Direction, Best Art Direction, Best Audio Design, Innovation and Accessibility, and also Best Action Adventure Game. For Most Anticipated Game, there is Elden Ring, God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, Breath of the Wild sequel, and Starfield, which those are the kind of games where normally 1 or 2 of those are in the Game of the Year category, and that's where you think, like, okay, there's only like 1 or 2 that are realistically going to take it. This time around, I do feel like a lot of these games are on equal footing, and that's not to say that they're bad games. They're all great, but it's just, there's no one obvious answer, right? I think it really depends on like which 2 or 3 that you personally played, and that's where you think, like, okay, I really enjoyed It Takes Two or Psychonauts. I think those are going to win. Oh, I played Ratchet & Clank. I think that's going to win. They all have, I think, a really fair shot at taking it. I cannot wait to see what the result is going to be on that. We also saw Kana Bridge of Spirits was nominated for Best Independent Game. That would also be really cool to see Kana take it. Yeah, it's just been a really fascinating year where there's not really a clear-cut answer as to what game's going to win Game of the Year or what game's going to win category X, Y, and Z. It seems like there's a really even spread amongst all this stuff, which that'll make for an interesting show come December 9th. And also an interesting 2022 because so many big games are launching in that first quarter, and oftentimes games that launch earlier in the year, they sometimes are easily overlooked when it comes to the submission process for Game of the Year. So it would be fascinating to see how that plays out as well, but that's already over a year from now. It's just there's a lot of big stuff coming next year, and I'm already curious about that as well. Next up, as most of you are probably aware, this past week there was a new controversy surrounding Activision and the CEO Bobby Kotick, where the Wall Street Journal published a pretty long piece going over how he knew about the sexual misconduct going on at the company, how he overlooked it, and how there are some allegations being thrown at him himself. And not to paraphrase the whole thing, we'll do kind of a quick recap for those that maybe haven't kept up too much with this, but back in July, that's when the state of California sued the company after the findings of a 2-year-long investigation. They found examples of sexual harassment, women being regularly paid less for similar positions, a toxic workplace culture, so on and so forth. And now recently with this new report, there's more examples with Bobby Kotick himself to blame. Where Dan Bunting, one of the studio heads of Treyarch, he was accused of sexual harassment. HR at the time recommended he be terminated, and apparently Kotick protected him. That led to other disciplinary measures, but not straight-out termination. Kotick himself was accused of harassing women on multiple occasions. There was an incident in 2006 where he threatened an assistant via voicemail, claiming that he'd have her killed, which he then apologized for. Back in August, somewhere around there, when J. Allen Brack left, this is when Activision replaced him with Jen O'Neill and Mike Ybarra. We already see that Jen O'Neill is leaving the company, where she claims she was being paid less and tokenized. And keep in mind, she was put there in place to, rectify some of the issues that were being, thrown at Activision at the time. There's a lot more to this. It's a laundry list, but at this point with the story, so far, largely, it's that the Activision board is still standing by Kotick. And that's where we can talk about Jim Ryan, because SIE President CEO Jim Ryan sent an email to employees that said, and I quote, "The PlayStation leadership was disheartened and frankly stunned to read that Activision has not done enough to address a deep-seated culture of discrimination and harassment." They also say in this email to employees, so this isn't necessarily something that's publicized, but this was released via Bloomberg, "We outreached to Activision immediately after the article was published to express our deep concern and to ask how they plan to address the claims made in the article. We do not believe their statements of response properly address the situation." Now that was on Wednesday. Recently, Xbox head Phil Spencer also joined in with an email to staff where he says, and I quote, "The team are disturbed and deeply troubled by the horrific events and actions. This type of behavior has no place in our industry, and apparently that the Xbox team will be evaluating all aspects of their relationship with Activision Blizzard and making ongoing proactive adjustments." So we have that, right? There's also the one group of shareholders that are calling on Bobby Kotick to resign, along with 2 of the longest standing board members, though it's important to note that this is a rather small collective, so they have about a 0.6% stake in the company, and they've been very critical of the company for a long time. They're an activist shareholder group called SOC, but there's that. There's also a petition going around internally with over 1,000 signatures. That's roughly 10% of the entire workforce, and like we said, PlayStation and Xbox are applying some pressure, and with all of this, the board is still standing behind Kotick, giving this canned response where they say, and I quote, "We respect all feedback from our valued partners, and we are committed to the work of ensuring our culture and workplace are safe, diverse, and inclusive." Wow, what an absolutely awful situation going on at Activision right now. And it should go without saying that, yeah, Bobby Kotick needs to get kicked out of there, fired, or at a minimum, the decent thing to do would be to resign, which they're calling for that by the end of this year. You would hope that would happen, right? But it's just, it's flat out embarrassing that the board members are backing him throughout this entire ordeal, and every group, employees, long-standing partners are asking for some sort of, answer, resolution, or being held accountable for the actions that is going on within this company. And well, that's the other little caveat here when it comes to like the very obvious side of this, right? We've got a multi-billion-dollar company, and we've got 2 other, long-standing partners, which as 2 console manufacturers, they do have a bit of leverage here versus what is a big publisher that puts their games out on those platforms. So in theory, yes, PlayStation and Xbox are doing what might be seen as a good thing here, but they're also 2 big companies with their own vested interests. And, PlayStation in particular has that exclusivity agreement with the Call of Duty franchise for marketing rights, exclusive content every single year. And so, of course, with PlayStation, they want to not, look out of position in this situation. It's a conflict of interest, and so they might not be as willing to do something, or at least you would hope, right? You would think that they would do the right thing, but we also have a situation where we've got plenty of companies that do terrible things. Like Ubisoft recently had a lot of stuff come out from them as well, and sure enough, PlayStation and Xbox really didn't do much of anything, or at least they didn't send out any sort of internal memos that got out to the public where they were, distraught or unhappy with how Ubisoft was carrying themselves as a company. But and that's more the pessimistic side of me. You all know I'm largely optimistic, but when we look at three multi-billion-dollar companies, it's like, all right, everybody's sort of looking out for themselves here, and at least for Activision, where, well, now the floodgates are open since that story came out in the summer, right? So we have all these current and former employees finally putting out all these stories and anecdotes, corroborating with one another and painting a very clear picture of how over the years it's not really been ideal to work there if you're a woman, and that's terrible, especially when we have Jen O'Neill. She was just hired next to Mike Ibarra, and she's already leaving going, yeah, I wasn't paid as much, this company they're not really, I don't believe that they're going in the right direction. You want to see immediate change, which they kind of did. They fired 20-something employees. Again, J. Allen Brack left. That's why Jen O'Neill and Mike Ibarra were there, but it's just clearly there's not enough. And with Bobby Kotick, yes, get him out of there. I would really like to think that as the two console manufacturers, PlayStation and Xbox, and certainly with PlayStation where they have that partnership, they do have more leverage here to really apply some pressure to Activision if everything else isn't already enough, which it seems like that's not the case. But I would like to see some meaningful change by the end of this year, like everybody's really calling for. Like, let's get this done, because if it isn't happening now, it may never happen. Moving on to our next story, there was a recent thread on the PS5 subreddit that is calling for Sony to change the refund policy, where the title says, and I quote, "If games are $70 now, Sony should really change the refund policy, get with the times." This user was going over their frustrations with Battlefield 2042, and a lot of people right now are not really having a great time with that game, but this user in particular was very upset when they found out that just buying and even downloading the game nullifies you from getting a refund of any kind, and that is PlayStation's policy. That's also been well documented throughout the years. They just, that's what it is. You can't even download the game. That's why the whole Cyberpunk 2077 situation was a pretty big deal, because Sony basically had to change their own policy as a special exception for that game, and that's when they allowed you to get a refund if you bought it and even played it. That's where you can request it for that one game in particular. But oftentimes, if you try to get a refund for anything else, if you download the game, you can't get a refund. That's just how it is on PSN, which is kind of, no, not kind of, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, just downloading the game, not even a matter of downloading it and not starting it, which this is where it also gets really weird and muddy, because this thread has 2,000 comments. That's a lot of engagement. On this subreddit, it's been a long time since I've seen a thread get to 2,000 comments, so clearly this is something where a lot of people are, passionate and very upset about it, and rightfully so, because it's a really bad refund policy. But when you look through all those comments, and throughout the years, you can see that there is some weird discrepancies where some people are able to get a refund if they just mention that, hey, I didn't start it. Yes, I downloaded it, but I didn't start it, and they can see that on their end, and they'll maybe do a special exception for that one time where you're allowed to get a refund. Maybe some people try to abuse it, and that's where they get denied consistently. But there's also people where the first time they ever try to get a refund, and yeah, they download the game, they're not given the refund. I think it largely depends on whatever support person you end up getting, but there's also the comparisons of how, Steam, for example, it's much better over there, where if you buy a game within 14 days and you have less than 2 hours of playtime, it's pretty much an automated refund system. And then if it's outside of that, it goes to a manual human review, where there's still a good chance that you might get the refund if you're say making a solid case of like, well, yeah, I played it for 3 hours, or yeah, I had it for 15 days, but I'm under the 2 hours or whatever, and you might be approved that way. It'll just take longer. And then for Microsoft, where recently their defined refund policy is a matter of just staying under a certain amount of playtime, and that's also, I believe, under 14 days, which for a while it was actually the same as PlayStation's, or at least if you tried to get a refund, you got the same results, where it's like, oh, you played it. You can't get a refund, but it seems like you might have a better shot at getting a refund on Xbox versus PlayStation, just on average. No hard data, but that seems to be a pretty well-accepted consensus, and again, their policy does outline under a certain amount of playtime, so it seems like the lines are a bit blurred there, but it's the same thing like when we saw the game trial feature launch on PS5, where like 2 or 3 games have it right now: Death Stranding, Sackboy, and then Biomutant also has it. And that's based on when you start downloading the game, that's when the trial timer starts of like 5 to 6 hours, depending on the game that you're trying to test out. Why does it start at the download button? That doesn't make any sense. So why does a refund start at the download button? There's just... it couldn't be more obvious that it's bad at refund system. And I would hope that they do something about it eventually, but I don't think they're going to. I will say with the Steam refund policy, it is fantastic, but that might be a different circumstance in light of how a console manufacturer operates their storefront, where typically, their QA process is a lot more strict versus, like the Steam storefront, where you have a lot of like early access games that very clearly are not going to be like up to par, or they don't run all that well, or they're really short, or they're bad, or it's like shovelware. Like, it's just that's part of the PC ecosystem, which, it comes with the territory. But that might be why Steam is so lenient with returns, because they have so many returns going through that system that are oftentimes justified, right? Console manufacturers may not see it that way because there is a tighter QA process, and so you should be more aware of buying a game and knowing that, okay, it's going to be a product that works, and well, that says more about the kind of games that are releasing nowadays, where they actually come out and they aren't up to snuff, and they don't work correctly, and they are too they do crash too frequently or have way too many bugs, and that's why the refund policy needs to change. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I want to talk about with you all from this past week. Our Tuesday video was 30 Platinums in 30 Days, Part 2. I know a lot of you really liked that first one, and so I finally did another one, which is basically the same thing, but had to do PS5 games this time. I also said no super short games, which there's only like 1 or 2 in there that are really short, but for the most part, your standard affair of games that take 5 to 12 hours. I didn't double or triple up on anything, so that's a whole journey. That's how I spent my October. If you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. I would really appreciate a like over there. I don't ask for that too often, but projects that take that long, it really goes a long way if you watch the video, send it a like, share it to a friend or whatever. Helps a lot, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I don't think I'll be doing that again anytime soon. But if you enjoyed it, thank you so much for the support, as always, and that's it for now. Probably something else coming this Tuesday, don't know for sure, but that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.